From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
You that on behalf of the Library of Congress, welcome to the 2011 National Book Festival. We hope that you are having a wonderful day celebrating the joy of reading here on the National Mall. And I also want to inform you that the pavilion's presentations are being filmed by the Library of Congress's website for their archives and by C-SPAN for airing on Book TV. So please be mindful of this as you enjoy the presentation. In addition, please do not sit on the camera risers that are located at the back of the pavilion. And we also ask that you turn off your cell phones as well. Again, I'm pleased to be here with you this afternoon to introduce author Amy Chua. Perhaps some of you have her book with you, maybe. I was asked to introduce Amy, and I sort of described the buzz around her book like a secret that burns your ears. It was something about her book that sort of spread faster than one of those 30% off friends and family coupons at your favorite department store that sort of, makes the rounds so quickly. I first heard about it as an email from a friend of mine whose daughter goes to school with my daughter, and she wondered in writing whether there was something to one mother's Chinese style of parenting. So one email led to another, and this sort of trickled out all across the country, and suddenly moms everywhere were inboxing and Facebooking and tweeting and book meeting and rolling their eyes and cheering about this tiger mom writer. And then one of my colleagues did a story about the book, and Amy, this will come as no shock to you that there are some mamas and daddies who have some strong opinions about your words. So for those of you who've joined us today and are wondering about some of Amy's parental philosophies, allow me to quote a few things from her book. She threatened to put her 3-year-old out in the winter for being disobedient. She rejected certain homemade birthday cards from her daughters. She did not allow sleepovers or play dates, and man, that would not fly in my house. There were grueling piano lessons, and strict, uncompromising child rearing was the rule of the house. No TV, no computer games, no school plays. And moms across the country, and dads too, they laughed, they cried, and they wondered aloud about the lives of Sophia and Lulu. What became of these 2 young girls? I have dear friends who inhaled this book, who thought it was refreshing to hear a different opinion about parenting. Things that parents discuss in private but don't want to talk about publicly. How we set high standards and have our children meet them. How do we avoid the need to overindulge and overschedule and overpraise our children? How do we help and shape and mold these young people and help them to tap into their God-given talents and cultivate the ones that might serve them well in the world? You should know that Sophia is now 18 and a freshman at Harvard. She has a wonderful blog and defends her mother whenever she can. Lulu is at a tennis match right now, so if you see Amy break away on her phone for a second just to check the score, you will understand why. She found a way to do great things with her daughter. She's going to share some lessons on her journey, lessons that you may learn from today. And so without any further delay, I am so glad to bring to you Amy Chua.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and thank you all for coming this afternoon. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to be speaking to you here on the spectacular National Mall and to such a crowd. I really can't believe it. I am really thrilled to be part of this year's National Book Festival. So, to put it mildly, it's been an intense 9 months since my book came out. Things have happened to me, both good and bad, that I couldn't have imagined for a million years. On the not-so-good front, the very day my book came out, the infamous Wall Street Journal article had appeared just 2 days earlier, and I was suddenly receiving 500 emails every hour, and I was completely shell-shocked. The very day my book came out, I was invited onto the Today Show. And at 6 a.m., the first question the host, Meredith Vieira, asks me, this is in front of 2 million people, is, yes or no, are you a monster? Now that's a conversation starter. 5 days and approximately 500,000 internet hits later, my family would be called the most notorious household in the Western world. On the positive side, I have heard from thousands and thousands of people from all backgrounds, from all over the country, who wrote to say, after reading my book, and not just the excerpt, that reading my book made them laugh, cry, and understand their own families better. And this has made everything worth it for me and helped carry me through some of the rougher patches. On the just plain surreal front, I've had 2 live tigers in my house as part of a photo shoot for Time. I was told beforehand that there were going to be these incredibly cute 4-week-old cubs, and that they were going to be adorable and fluffy and just like big cats. Well, there was apparently a misunderstanding, because when they arrived, they were 6 months and 8 months old, and they were these humongous beasts that arrived in chains, these cross chains, with these 2 trainers each restraining them and throwing them live chickens. And I was asked at one point, okay, for this shot, we want you to grab this one by the scruff and show him what a tiger mom's like. And I remember asking, kind of jokingly, these guys wouldn't actually eat a human being, would they? And the trainers answered, probably not. We just fed them. Not so reassuring. Much of the intense reaction to my book has been based on a misunderstanding. The Wall Street Journal, as you know, excerpted parts of the opening of my book under the headline, Why Chinese Mothers Are Superior. And I feel like a broken record. I feel like I've said this a million times, but it's just something I have to do. I did not choose or ever see that headline until I opened the newspaper, and I do not agree with it. I do not believe that Chinese mothers are superior. I believe there are many ways of being a good parent. And in fact, if you're wondering, how did a Yale law professor, who usually writes books about globalization and foreign policy, end up writing this book? Well, I actually wrote this book in a moment of sheer crisis, when my younger daughter, Lulu, rebelled. So by way of background, I myself was raised by very strict Chinese immigrant parents who arrived in the United States in 1960 as graduate students. My parents actually eloped to MIT, not the most romantic place to elope to. But they were so poor that they could not afford heat their first 2 winters in Boston and wore blankets around the apartment to stay warm. As parents, my mom and dad demanded total respect and were very tough with my 3 younger sisters and me. The famous list that Leslie quoted from, the no sleepovers and play dates, the no A minuses, which, by the way, I intended to be kind of tongue-in-cheek, was applied to me when I was a little with no humor. A minuses were considered a bad grade. I had to drill math and Chinese every day and piano, speak Chinese at home, no sleepovers, no boyfriends. I remember one story, my senior prom. I was asked to the senior prom, and my dad said, no, I don't think you need to go to that. And my mother intervened on my behalf. And she said, you know, it's her last year, let her go. So finally, my father capitulates and said I could go on one condition, that I be back home by 9 p.m., which is when everyone else was just leaving. So I went to the prom, I came back at 9 p.m., and then I snuck back out a window. Despite how strict my parents were with me, and I know some of you do get this, the strategy amazingly worked. And I think it's hard for people to understand who aren't from these kinds of families. It doesn't always work, but with me, it did. Today, I adore my parents, and as one indication of that, we voluntarily vacation with them every chance we get. We never take a vacation without bringing my parents along. And in fact, I guess I would say that looking back now, although I had plenty of complaints with them when I was growing up, looking back now, my parents having high expectations for me, coupled with love. I mean, without love, there's just nothing. But they're having high expectations for me, coupled with love, is the greatest gift that anyone has ever given me. Which is why, even though my husband's not Chinese, he's actually Jewish American, I tried to raise my own two daughters, Sophia and Lulu, the same way that my parents raised me. Now, with my first daughter, Sophia, things went very smoothly. She was an easy child, a great student. I never had to force her to do anything. She's actually incredibly strong-willed, and at the end of the book, I put in a true line. She said, you know, Mommy, people are going to assume that strict parenting was imposed on me, when in fact, I chose to go along with it on my own will. But still, it was easy, and I got cocky. I thought, you know, what is wrong with all these parents? This is the voice that you hear at the opening of the book. You just have to be a little firm, and everyone can go to Carnegie Hall. But I know there are a lot of parents out there, and I think fate has a way of evening itself out. My second daughter, Lulu, came along, and she's a real fireball. We have very similar personalities, and boy, did I get my comeuppance. We locked horns from day one. Even when I was pregnant with her, she was kicking all the time till I was black and blue. I feel like Lulu was born saying no. And the book, which is supposed to be funny, you know, some people get it, some people don't. The book is filled with zany showdowns between my daughters and me, in which my daughters always win. And it's funny, Leslie just mentioned the threatening to put Lulu out in the freezing cold. I read these things about myself in the media. It's usually Amy Chua put her 3-year-old in the freezing cold. Well, if you read the book, it's only chapter 2. Here's how the scene really went. Lulu is 3. We're having our first piano session. She has a screaming, kicking, scratching tantrum. Yelling, screaming, whatever. After about 15 minutes of this, I do drag her to the door, and it is a freezing cold day, and I open the door and I say, if you don't stop kicking and screaming, you're gonna have to go outside. What does Lulu do? She's dressed only in a sweater and skirt. She's 3. She steps outside and faces me defiant. I ended up in that chapter having to bribe her to come back in with hot chocolate and brownies. There is nothing I can threaten her with, and she always calls my bluff, and it's still a work in progress. Another one of my favorite parts, some of you may have kids that you just kind of can read each other's minds. Another one of my favorite parts is another music scene, and Lulu's maybe about 7 now. We're working on the violin now. And in the middle of a violin practice session, Lulu bursts out, "Stop it, Mommy, just stop it." And I responded, "Lulu, I didn't say anything. I didn't say one word." And Lulu responded, "Your brain is annoying me." Yeah. I know what you're thinking. And she was right. I was thinking that her right elbow was too high, her dynamics were all wrong, and that she had to shape her phrases better. So the first 2/3 of the book is supposed to be comic, a bit of a self-parody. Nobody ever mentions my dogs. See, the first line of the book is this is a story about a mother, 2 daughters, and 2 dogs. It's me trying to apply this strict parenting to my 2 big, goofy, white Samoyeds. But then the last third of the book is very different. The book swerves because my life swerved. When Lulu turned 13, she rebelled. Now, we had always fought and argued, but we'd always been incredibly close and made up and snuggled in bed. But maybe this is like all teenagers. At 13, it was different. She suddenly became incredibly angry and rude and alienated, just seemed to turn against everything I'd ever stood for. I couldn't talk to her. Around the same time, my younger sister, Katrine, with whom I'm very close, got leukemia and had to have a bone marrow transplant. was a very dark stage in my life. I mean, talk about reevaluating what's important. When Katrina was diagnosed, she had a 10-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I was driving to Boston all the time. Meanwhile, my fights with Lulu were getting worse and worse. I couldn't, something seemed wrong with her eyes. I just started to feel that my whole family was falling apart. And I really began questioning myself, amazingly for the first time, you know, have I done everything wrong? And the culminating point of the book, I don't want to give it away, but it's a scene near the end in Red Square, Moscow. And we had this massive, humiliating public fight, screaming fight. And Lulu said to me in front of a lot of people, some of the most painful things, no, the most painful things that anyone has ever said to me. She said, you know, I hate you, I hate the violin, I hate this family, you make me feel bad about myself every second, you're a terrible mother, you're selfish, everything you say you do for me is actually for yourself. So I think I'm pretty tough on myself. I mean, the book is pretty much of a self-indictment as well. But anyway, after that, I changed. Not completely, don't worry, but I pulled back. And it was this moment where I realized, oh my God, I might really lose my daughter. You know, I might, and when I realized that, I didn't care about the school or the violin. I just, you know, nothing's worth that. So I let Lulu drop the violin, which was very painful for me. She was a beautiful player. She was concert master. She was playing tennis instead. I loosened up socially a lot. I mean, the kid has, you know, iPod, Facebook, texting. She's had 4 sleepovers in the last 2 months. And I'm not happy about that, in case you think I've, you know, it's a work in progress, constant negotiation. So Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother is the story of my own journey as a mother. It was never intended to be a parenting guide or a sally into the mommy wars. In fact, I started writing it the very day after that massive blow up in Red Square. The next morning, I got out of bed, I went to my computer, and even though I usually have writer's block with my 2 previous books, I get up at 6, and if I can just crank out 3 sentences, that's a good day for me. But in this case, the words just poured out. I wrote the first 2/3 in just 2 months, and it's essentially unedited. I showed every single page to both my daughters and my husband, and it was basically like family therapy. With all that said, the book does have a point of view. While I certainly have regrets, if I had to raise my girls all over again, I would basically do the same thing with some adjustments. So I'm not saying it's for everyone, I'm not saying it's a better approach, but I am a proud, strict mom, taken down a few notches to be sure, but I'm very proud of the daughters I raised and very proud of my relationship with them. And I guess more generally, I do think that Western parenting, using that term very loosely, obviously there are many, many different ways of parenting here, but I think that Western parenting, using that term loosely, has become too permissive and too indulgent. I believe that we in the West can ask a little more of our kids, and that they will not only respond to the challenge, but thrive. And what I want to do now is switch gears and address what I see as some of the weaknesses in today's sort of mainstream Western parenting. Again, using that term very loosely. And specifically, I want to talk about 3 things that come up all the time in questions. One is self-esteem. Second is this question of choice and how much freedom and choice we should give our kids. And finally, happiness, because I'm asked about that a lot. So first, on self-esteem. Western parents spend a lot of time worrying about this, but I'm not sure they really know how to instill it. I think we do our children a disservice when we praise them when they know they haven't put in their best effort, or when we give them trophies when they haven't accomplished anything. That doesn't give them real inner strength, real resilience. True self-esteem has to be earned, the old-fashioned way, by overcoming a challenge or mastering something. Jokes aside about A+s and sleepovers and gold medals, for me, in the end, it is absolutely not about grades or achievement or colleges. It's about believing in your child more than anyone else, not letting them give up when they want to, helping them see that they are capable of more than they think. Second thing I want to talk about is choice and freedom. And while part of the lesson I learned is I had to give Lulu more choice, I still do think that Western parents tend to give children too much choice, especially when they're very young. If you give a 6 or 7-year-old the choice to pursue their passions for the day, it's probably going to be playing video games and eating candy all day. Young kids are not mature enough to know what's best for them. I remember once when Lulu came home, when she was about 7, she came home with a bad math test. And she announced, stomped in, "I'm bad at math, I hate math." Now, I think some parents, and I know this because my husband took this view, their first instinct would be, "Don't worry, honey, you don't have to be good at math. You know, you can be good at something else. Lots of people aren't good at math. You can be good at something else." Well, I went the opposite way. I said, "No way, you're 7. How do you know you're not good at math?" And I wrote up all these practice tests by hand, and I drilled them every night for a week after dinner with her with a stopwatch. It was only for a week, okay? This was not Guantanamo Bay. After the week, she took the next test, and she did really well on it. And after that, some of our friends started calling her Math Whiz, and today, math is one of Lulu's favorite subjects. One of the reasons that my husband, who grew up with a completely different background, he actually grew up in DC, he went to Georgetown Day, his parents were very liberal, they could do anything pretty much. One of the reasons that he supported my strict parenting is because he is somebody who wished that he had been forced to do more things. He remembers when he was about 6 or 7, his mom gave him a choice. Do you want to learn to play the violin, or do you want to play with your friends? Play with their friends. And he's always thought he was kind of musical, but he can't read notes. He also wishes someone had forced him to speak a second language. This is one thing my daughters don't complain about. They're fluent in Mandarin, and now they're seeing all their friends with the earphones and the tapes, and I think that's something that they're happy they can do. Also, there's this question of long-term versus short-term choices. One of the really, I've had a lot of tough emails. I know a lot of people disagree with me, but one of the nicest emails I got was from somebody from Detroit, and she wrote me and she said, "I'm a single mom, I'm a cop, I work 2 jobs, I have twin daughters, and I couldn't possibly do the whole violin, piano thing that you do, but I think I'm a tiger mom, and here's why. When I would drag myself home at 9 p.m. exhausted, I would pull my 2 daughters out and say, 'Let me look at the homework, that's not good enough, recopy that, why did you miss this on a test? I don't like these friends, that boyfriend's no good, that field trip is useless.' Why did I do this?" She said, "Because I was pregnant with my twins at 18, and I suffered a lot, and I didn't want them to have that same life. I wanted them to have more choices." And she said, "And I am so proud that I broke the cycle. Both my daughters have master's degrees, and I broke the cycle. And they have so many choices in their lives now, choices that I never had." The second, she and I are pen pals now, actually. The third thing I want to touch on is happiness, because I see this about myself in all the reviews, and I think it's a terrible misunderstanding. If I had a magic button and I could pick happiness or success for my children, I would pick happiness for them in a second. That is a no-brainer. I just think it is so much more complicated. I do not believe that saying to your kids, "Do whatever you want, pursue your passions," leads to happier kids or happier adults. As you know, in the United States, we have very high rates of teenage anxiety, teenage depression, teenage alcohol and substance abuse. The United States has the highest rate of teenage pregnancy in the developed world. In general, these are problems of not too much structure, but too little. And I'm not even sure that giving kids more freedom in the leads to more happiness in the short run. You know, I've had to give up a lot with Lulu, just as part of these negotiations. But sometimes I'll see that after, you know, her second hour on the internet, she's got this kind of glazed look on her eyes. And I think that's an addiction, not happiness. You know, even Facebook, you're just seeing how much more fun everyone else seems to be having. Conversely, I think there is something deeply fulfilling and happiness producing in doing something, anything, extremely well. Whether it's playing the saxophone or soccer or photography, there's a sense of pride and joy in knowing that you pushed yourself to the next level, whatever your potential is. You know, my youngest sister, Cindy, has Down syndrome, and my mom was really strict with her. I remember when she was little, my mom spending hours teaching Cindy how to tie her shoelaces, drilling multiplication tables with her, and practicing piano with her. Today, Cindy lives on her own. She was just engaged last month. We threw a big party for her. She works at Walmart, and her favorite thing is still to perform piano for her friends. And she has enormous self-esteem and a great relationship with my mother. So I think this kind of happiness or achievement question is a false choice. It's a false dichotomy. In general, I think a lot of the parenting debate does tend to boil down to false dichotomies. Another one I hear all the time is, well, do you want your kid to be creative or do you want them to work hard and be disciplined? Well, of course you want both, particularly in areas, particularly in America. I think we tend to romanticize creativity. You know, give your child a clarinet and amazing jazz will pop out. Especially in subjects like math and music, you need basic skills first. Before you can come up with a theory of relativity, you need to be able to multiply. Really well, actually. Before you can play a Mozart violin concerto incredibly emotionally and passionately, you need to be able to play in tune. After, you know, there was a lot of tough stuff out there, and after my book came out, there were, you know, I think America loves a rebel. So a lot of people took Lulu's side on the internet. There were Lulu fan clubs. But people were incredibly cruel about Sophia. You know, all over it was like, oh, that kid, the obedient one, she's a robot, she's gonna be mentally ill, she's gonna be committing suicide. How does Sophia respond? I'm incredibly proud of her. She's, you know, wrote an op-ed defending me. She starts her own blog. She's much more public service oriented than I am. She has started these green organic things. She's a very creative, independent girl, even with a strict parent. So I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So let me begin to wrap up by sharing with you I think a funny story that really has an important point to it. You might be interested to know that my book in China is being marketed in exactly the opposite way. And in fact, when I first saw the cover of the book, I was horrified, and I thought, oh my God, I called up my husband and my agent, and I said, I might have to bring a lawsuit. Because I looked at the cover of the book, and, you know, in English, it's Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. The Chinese translation of my title is Parenting by a Yale Law Professor. Get this, get the subtitle, How to Raise Kids in America. And there's a picture of me wrapped in a huge red, white, and blue US flag. And I was horrified. I said, how can this be? But I talked to friends and colleagues in China, and they explained to me, you know, Amy, it's actually not as bad a title as you think. Because in China, they have exactly the opposite problem as the United States. In China today, even young kids basically study and work from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. every day. Talk about not caring about self-esteem. Their grades are publicly posted from 1 to whatever, the bottom. There's really very little time for relaxing, friends. They've never heard of sleepovers. It was so weird for me. Well, in the US, I'm known as, you know, the meanest mom in the world. China's version of Marie Claire, the women's magazine, asked me to give an interview giving their readers tips on how to be friends with your daughters. and talking with your children about intimacy and men. The key takeaway point, though, the important serious point, is that China is trying to learn from the West. They know that their education system is too rote, too stifling, too just plain miserable. And they are trying to find ways to encourage more creativity and individuality and leadership in their children. Same with Korea and Japan. Now, seeing these educational shifts in China, some Americans are taking a self-congratulatory stance. You know, see, even the Chinese are abandoning their methods to, and trying to be more like us. USA, USA, I think that such complacency is a mistake. We in the West should be trying to improve too. We should keep what we do well, and we do so much well in the West. We are good at teaching our kids how to be independent and irreverent and to think outside the box. But we should also think candidly about what we're not doing so well. And we do have serious problems. The average American kid spends 70% more time watching TV than attending school. In the recent international OECD tests, Shanghai kids placed #1 in the world in math, reading, and science, with the US coming in and embarrassingly 23rd in science and 34th in math. Of course we don't want to go to the extreme of China. They're trying to change too. But is there nothing we can learn from China? Well, I think that one of the things that the Asian nations do very well that we might take a page from, even if we reject 90% of the way they do it, one of the things I think they do very well is they are very good at instilling a strong work ethic and self-discipline in kids at a young age. My daughter Sophia is now 18, but she actually gave me this idea. She told me that, with all this Tiger Mom stuff, everyone assumes that I must have been so miserable. But she thinks that she was actually much less stressed in high school. And that's because she knew how to sit down and focus for 2 hours. From piano or from early studies, while her other people were, trying to finish the paper at 3 in the morning, needing Red Bull, to have the TV on. She could sit down, get the job done, and be able to talk to her friends at 11, go to sleep on time. And I think this is especially important today in this era of media bombardment, where we are so distracted. I'm addicted to my BlackBerry and email. It's just hard to focus. So I think one way we might start to combine the best of East and West, or elements, is maybe we can be a little more strict, a little more structured, impose a little more discipline on our children when they are very young and will still listen to us, followed by increasing independence and self-direction and responsibility and self-reliance in their teenage years. Maybe if we instill more self-discipline in them when they're little, there will be less need to do helicopter parenting when they're in high school. To conclude, I look around this audience and I see an incredibly diverse and vibrant crowd. And I want to ask each of you, I know you all have very different backgrounds, but I want to ask each of you to think back to your own parents, or maybe grandparents, maybe great-grandparents, whoever that ancestor was who first arrived in this country with practically nothing and pulled themselves out of poverty. For some of you, perhaps it was an immigrant from England or Ireland in the 1800s, or someone who endured and survived Jim Crow, or someone who arrived from Eastern Europe through Ellis Island to escape pogroms in the old country. How do you think those people parented? I bet they didn't sugarcoat or tolerate much disrespect or spend their whole time arranging playdates for children. I bet for them, parenting was about survival and building character, about taking advantage of every opportunity because they knew how hard opportunity is to come by. I bet they worked incredibly hard and expected their kids to work hard and saw even the chance to strive for excellence as a gift. Like it or not, child rearing is inextricably linked with our nation's future. We as parents are raising the next generation. At stake is not only our children's well-being, but the durability of the American dream. Perhaps it's time for us to reclaim those traditional American values, not Chinese, but American values of hard work, responsibility, rigor, and respect for excellence. Thank you.
I'll get in first before all the tiger mothers to be descend on you and eat you up. You know, we're some people come from what I call severe bourgeois backgrounds. 60 hours a week of homework and school, and you will do well. Your family's prestige depends on you, especially against your cousins and your uncles. But I think you do have a rather privileged environment. We have in America a terrible problem of nuclear families. Overworked, these are the most overworked families in the world, and very little support. And they need guidance as to say, well, how can I apply these bourgeois values? How can I give? Because there's peer pressure, there's all this, bad media pressure. It's very difficult for a normal parent's nuclear family to impose a structure that you and I have had.
Yeah. Well, thank you. First of all, I didn't write this as a parenting book, and I really wouldn't expect anybody to try to follow what I did. If far from being a how-to guide, I think it's more of a don't try this at home guide, actually, given some of the things But I think the best answer is I was very privileged. My job as a teacher allows me much more flexibility to do what, but that's why I read the story about the single mom who was a cop, who, of course, we can't all spend time doing violin and piano, but for me it's really just about connection and being committed. I think the worst parent you could be would be somebody who says, you gotta get straight A's, and then and I'm going out for a drink. I think if you're gonna have those high expectations and put that kind of pressure, then you have to be there in the trenches. But it's different. It doesn't have to always be A's or, I'm from an academic family myself. I really, teaching at Yale Law School, I can tell you, I have so many talented students, and I can tell you some of them come from incredibly lenient parents, some of them come from strict parents, some of them come from no parents. I mean, people make it to great places in so many different ways. Yeah, thank you.
I saw you on the Colbert Report a few months ago, and I'm just wondering, he seems random with his authors. I mean, how was that to be on there? Because you didn't really know what question he was going to ask you.
This question is, how was it like to be on Stephen Colbert's show? I was more nervous for that than any other interview. Because I really love the show, and and also he's playing a role. So how do you deal with this? I have to say, I think he's somebody that's almost more comfortable in his role. But he's super, super nice and super, super smart. He came to talk to me a little bit beforehand. It did feel sort of random. I think he's unscripted. I think he just kind of goes out there. His people give him stuff of what to say if he needs to. I think he totally ignores it. So I think he's just on the spot. But I think he's really smart, and I think he kind of he was the first person to sort of, in a way, sort of be nice to me, even though I don't think he read the whole book.
You said that your husband is Jewish, and that in your blurb it says that your children were raised Jewish. Does that mean they went through the whole bat mitzvah business? And talk about that.
Yeah, it's actually a chapter in my book. I mean, my husband is not religious at all, but they're very proud cultural Jews. And both my daughters did have bat mitzvahs, but in a very unconventional way. And he's really the expert. That's something that was more important that he was doing with my girls, as well as taking them to Yankees games and Red Sox games. But And my younger daughter Lulu actually has chosen a much stronger Jewish identity than my, on her own. But that's my husband's side. Hi.
Hi, Ms. Chua. First of all, I just wanted to say that it's very obvious that you're a very loving parent, and I definitely appreciate that you contribute to the diversity of parenting styles. What I kind of wondered, because in the aftermath of the book, like a lot of my peers, I'm a college student, we're sort of, wondering why is it that you branded the style particularly as Chinese? And I only say this because the context, especially of Asian Americans right now, it's just very, like you said, very robotic, very, STEM, mathematic, and it's unfortunate, like you're sort of the most recent mainstream figure. And my second question is, you do mention that this isn't a formula, but you say that there is a list sort of to follow, and I've always kind of wondered about what if you happen to follow this formula and there's no success because success is maybe out of control. You can't necessarily get a job because of the recession. And sorry, I'm asking way too many questions. And thirdly, I was just wondering in your mandates to your children if there was any explanation behind it, like you should practice the violin because I want passion in you, or
okay,
yeah.
Great. So first of all, on the Asian American question, this is very frustrating to me because maybe I'm a lawyer and I read and write very carefully. On the second page of my book, I say that I'm using the term Chinese mother very loosely. In particular, I say I was having a conversation with a white guy from, I can't remember what state it was, Nebraska, I think it was. And after talking about it, he and I decided that his Irish working class father had definitely been a Chinese mother. And then I, in the next sentence, say, there are many, many Chinese people by ethnicity who do not parent this way, blah, 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 blah. So I sort of define my terms in the beginning. Secondly, though, one of the things I most disagree with, when I read the criticism of my book is this, are you entrenching model minority stereotypes? I cannot even begin to say how much I think this is wrong-minded. What is the stereotype of a model minority, okay? If it's about the violin or whatever, math, the end of my book is all about a girl who rebels against it. And the lesson is to let her pursue her passion, right? So right there, it's not about the list, right? It's about, it's the opposite. Secondly, I think the stereotype, the negative stereotype of the Asian is the sort of obsequious, humorless, robotic, subservient person. And one thing that's very important is humor. This book is satirical, it's definitely different, and even if you hate it, it's obviously not meek. I feel like everything I have ever written has been, hated or not, has been sort of running against conventional wisdom and different and bold. So the idea that this is, it's like missing the big, forest for the trees. It's a, I think a lot of people haven't read my book, but if you reach the end, one surprise is that the book, despite on the surface you get all this strictness, strict rules, the book is really one that celebrates rebellion. My daughter Lulu is clearly the protagonist. She's a rebel. I reveal in the last chapter that my own father, my father who is basically my idol, that he, despite being very strict with us, was a rebel. He hated his Chinese mother. He left, he crossed an ocean, left the continent, never looked back. He was a rebel. Sophia's a rebel in her own way, and I think writing this book is actually very rebellious. So to me, seeing this book as anything consistent with model minority stereotypes, it's, I don't see it myself. I feel like that's somebody that only read the first page and didn't understand the satire and the transformation that goes on in the book. I'll get to the other ones. Yeah.
Hi, Mrs. Chua. You talk about dichotomies, and I think one of the dichotomies that exists in American culture is the whole working mom versus the non-working mom. And as a working mom, I think there's a lot that society expects you to do it all and be it all at the same time. And so I want to hear a little bit about, in your philosophy of parenting, how you struggle with that, how you balance that, and I see some pride in being a working mom for my children and how you feel like that's made an impact for your daughters.
Yeah, I've definitely struggled with it a lot, and I think you have to make sacrifices. For many years when I was a a law professor, a young law professor. I had the same job as my husband, but because I made my own choices to do this violin stuff, I would sneak out. I never had time to have lunch with my colleagues or to schmooze in the halls. And the result is I definitely felt less central. I felt less sort of integrated. I did my job. I really loved my students. But there's only a certain amount of time. You're absolutely right. And when you make these choices, for me, it's been absolutely crucial. I think everyone has to make their own choice, but for me, it's really crucial that I work. I think I'd drive my children crazy if it's just that space. But, and I actually think it's a real problem. I mean, I was lucky again to have a job that gave me a lot of flexibility. And in my book, I write about these crazy shenanigans where I'm having office hours till 3:30. Then I say, there's a huge line of students, and I say, oh, excuse me, I have an appointment. I race out, I speed all the way to my daughter's, I drive her, pick her up, I do the little violin thing, come back from my appointment, and then put on my other hat, and then and it's really, I mean, the things that went in my household are, good food and cleanliness. It's like, the house is a mess, everything is chaotic. So, some things definitely have to go. But I think it's a great question.
Hi. Have you found in your experience any techniques or strategies with the children? I know sometimes they don't understand why, the great strictness and, or, I told you so or something like that, or just because I told you so. I know you talked about the end result. Your children have had great success in the end. Have you talked about how they can see the vision of the future of what all the hard work will mean from the music, and how to convey that to them, or how to show that vision to them, of what, how it'll turn out beautifully in the end? I mean,
well, I am not an expert. I mean, I have to tell you, parenting is definitely the hardest thing I've ever done. It never gets easy. It literally, I mean, Sophia's now very independent, but Lulu is still, we still argue all the time. We argue all the time about everything. And I kind of wrote the book meaning for it to be not this controversial thing, but being much more universal, this is about all mothers. We all want to raise strong, independent, responsible, happy kids. We all bring our own baggage. Some of it's cultural, but some of it is you either react, if you had a terrible childhood yourself, you react against that. In my case, I was trying to replicate. But we all make mistakes, and in some ways I feel like the real lesson of my book isn't strictness, but it's like being able to listen and caring and then adjusting when you make mistakes. I mean, I think the most important lesson in my book is not that I made them play, this hours of violin, but that when I almost lost Lulu, I saw it in time, and this is maybe a nice response to the woman who asked the question about Asian Americans. I think the tragedy is some of these strict parents from certain cultures, they do love their children, but they don't know how to show it. They think they're just being strict and preparing them for that, but they're losing their children. They can't see that the connection is being broken. And in a way, my book was designed to kind of address some of that, which is you have to listen, right? If it really is not working, you have to change. Otherwise, it's going to be a tragedy. So.
Yes. When I first began reading the book, I thought it was very divisive. And I couldn't help but wonder, I'm a lawyer, trained here at Georgetown, and I couldn't help but wonder, where were her citations? She's talking about model minorities. Let me flip to the back and see the site in the study that actually supports this assertion that you were making. But then I also respect the author's right to write in memoir. And so I began to draw back, and I ultimately finished the book. But the one question that remained as I read the book is this notion of success and what it is to be successful. It's one thing when you're an elite, just to use the term loosely by American standards, you're a Harvard Law grad, you're a Yale Law professor, and you're raising children to play the violin and the piano because, in your opinion, those are the elite musical instruments to play, or that's preferred to drama or play dates or sleepovers or sports. But there was a particular page where when Lulu was getting ready to audition for Juilliard, and you said, oh my God, there are so many immigrants, there's Russians, there's these people, there's Eastern Europeans, and I'm paraphrasing because I forgot to bring my book today, but you went on to say that for many of these people, this is their way out, and you felt inadequate. And it challenged some of my personal beliefs about parenting, which were, this is the same way that many impoverished mothers in the United States may feel about their children playing sports, who put them in these sports from a very early age and pressure them and allow them to live with people that they don't know in order to pursue this ideal of American success. And so while they may not have the academic acumen to get into Harvard Law, they are successful financially. I just wanted to get your take.
Well, let me, so to your first point, it's just a category problem, and I'm never going to be able to answer that question to people's satisfaction who ask me, where's the evidence? Because this book is not an academic book. It's a memoir. And it's written as a satirical, self-parody memoir, and it's so funny because people will come up to me and they'll say, like, it's almost like they forget that I wrote the book. They'll say, aha, you know, apparently, did you do this? And I'll say, yeah, I put that in the book, I wrote that. And it's almost like they forget that I'm, you know. So, but on your point about, I just think that maybe you're not understanding what I was trying to do, and that's more my fault as a writer, or maybe because parenting is so personal and charged, it's hard for people to see. But it's not, it's filled with jokes and contradictions, and I think it's not, I totally don't favor, the right way to read the book is not that I favor the piano and violin over drama. If you read the book carefully, in the middle chapter, I revealed that my husband went to Juilliard acting school, you know, and that we love, you know, drama, and we're best, you know, and it's all about the change. It's a little bit of parody of that, you're right, that immigrant mentality. I think the first generation that comes over, they tend to be very, you know, in a way selfish. It's like they're thinking about survival. They're not thinking about, you know, homeless people, and they just want their kids, they want to prepare their kids. So then they have these strict, crazy rules, no sleepovers. I remember when I asked my mom, why can't I have a sleepover? She looked like she was about to cry, and she said, but I don't understand, Amy. We have a bed here for you. Why do you need to go to someone else's house to sleep? You know, it was a very nuclear, and she wasn't trying to deprive me of anything. She just had this idea. So, and I know it's not a direct answer, but much of my book is also, it's about a lot of things. But one of the things it's about is about generational decline. It's not about Chinese people. It's about any family where you get this first generation, often they're immigrants, my parents, they come over with almost nothing, they work incredibly hard, they save everything for their children's education. Generation two, profiting from that, you know, when you say privilege, I have to tell you, I did not grow up privileged. I was privileged because they were educated, but not privileged in terms of money at all. But my generation, profiting from that, you know, we're professionals, I still work hard, but I spend a lot more, I'm much more indulgent. And then in my book, I say it's the next generation, Sophia and Lulu's generation, that I spend nights losing sleep about. Because it's not their fault, but they grow up, you know, in a comfortable home with 2 cars. They're used to vacationing in nice places. Their friends all have designer, nice clothes. And I did not want to raise spoiled, entitled children. You know, it's not about the achievement. I did not want to raise entitled children, partly because I think that's spoiled, entitled children are not good for society. And I also don't think that entitled people grow up to be happy. You know, we all have friends who are, you know, the ones, and who, they can't have relationships, they can't feel grateful, so that's another thing that was going on. We're done. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you all for coming. Thanks. Oh, okay.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.